Hi everyone, welcome to the new episode of the Prime View series of interviews with top business and technology leaders. Today I'm delighted to host Sid, who is Vice President of Digital Growth at Discovery, a company that probably does not need introduction. It's a global leader in real-life entertainment. So Sid, my first question is to you about your current role at the company. VP of Digital Growth is an emerging position. Tell us more about your journey, professional journey that has led you to your current position.
Sure thing. So first I'd like to qualify, what growth means at Discovery, since it usually means three separate things. Most companies use growth to mean either product growth, which sits within product. They use it to mean growth in terms of growth hacking, which is usually a kind of commercial function, which has its own, conversion specialists, focuses on the conversion funnel. And then the third is growth to just mean marketing, in which case, a lot of growth leaders fit into roles that would have been occupied by CMOs, let's say 5 to 10 years ago. The role at Discovery is a mix of this, the latter two, in the sense that it does involve kind of looking at the conversion funnel, having a bit of developmental resource to actually enact changes, but primarily focus on the marketing and retention operations in the sense that a traditional CMO would. My background before this role was in strategy consulting, where I was working with the Boston Consulting Group, but focused primarily on direct-to-consumer digital. So that was an area of our practice that we were building in Asia Pacific after the acquisition of a company called Digital Ventures, which is now a big part of BCG's stable. So we did a lot of work on, D2C products that didn't previously exist in the market, stuff like mobile banking, some very kind of retail and travel offerings. And as I started to get a taste of that, I realized that I, number one, really like D2C, and number two, wanted to work in a product for a sustained amount of time, which is when the move to Discovery became available. And I didn't start in growth. I started in what was called a digital innovation team. So the idea was look for low-hanging fruit, whether it's in terms of partnerships or product development for a media company itself, and try and segregate opportunities between what can be acted on now and what is strategic builds that require some time. This was in Singapore. And from there, unsurprisingly, inside a television company that was transitioning to digital, I moved to the streaming arm, where we very quickly realized that while we had traditional marketing teams and we had a product team, we didn't really have a link between those two. So the growth function was born and then ended up expanding and taking over the entirety of the digital marketing function. So it went from kind of being a strategy role to being a product role to then being a more marketing focused role out of necessity.
Being a VP of digital growth, you must have had this kind of obstacle or challenge of delivering a consistent user growth base in different new locations. I know actually that you have this case of working in new geographies, specifically in Scandinavian countries, that you've been able to deliver great results, build the user base, and also scale that process to the other geographies. If you could share that with our listeners.
Yeah, so as a company, Discovery owns a patchwork of media assets all over the world. So, Eurosport Player is a huge property that the European audiences may be more familiar with. And similarly, similar to Eurosport is a large part of our portfolio, Discovery had acquired, a company called SBS in Scandinavia, Scandinavian Broadcasting Services. And as a result, we own quite a lot of IP in general entertainment, in local sports rights. So we're actually a fairly embedded player in the TV industry there. My role and Discovery's plan was to create organic growth in digital using this kind of foothold and leveraging the fact that Scandinavia obviously was the most digitally advanced consumer base in the world, the highest willingness to pay, the highest penetration of online payments outside of a few markets. So that was our kind of skunk works in terms of proving that if we can generate organic growth here in digital streaming, then it makes sense to fight and expand that blueprint elsewhere. This took a bit of work, especially like any other company undergoing a digital transformation. You have to make big strategic decisions regarding cannibalization. You have to make big strategic decisions regarding what's your leading KPI that everyone has to get behind. How do you manage what you might euphemistically call the legacy business, but is still the real business that's powering most of our earnings, with the need for digital growth? And how do you navigate conflicts between these two? And being in the media business, those conflicts are frequent because it's always a real question of how do you window the content that you have? Do you put it first on your digital platforms? Do you retain, TV preview windows? And the obstacles that we had, I could place into three categories. Number one was big, clear strategic decisions. Actually getting to the point where we could say, this is the worth of a digital dollar. This is how important a paying digital subscriber is for this company, as opposed to a television view. So it's a huge strategic choice to make that everyone can understand and then, hopefully speak the same language. That trickles down to number two, which is KPIs. If, the leadership, and in our case, that is the president of, Discoveries International back then, which is JB Perrett, actually making these statements in strategic discussions, that this is what a paying subscriber is worth, this is what an ad-funded viewer is worth, and this is what a television viewer is worth. These trickled down into clarity on KPIs for everyone who's actually operating the business. So there's a strategic goal, there's kind of KPI clarity, which is what does it mean for me? And then number three, which is probably the hardest piece and the most long-running piece, is education, which is making everyone understand how a digital business works, how they would have to change the way they work, what's the difference in terms of the frequency of decision-making. There's a huge difference between quarterly planning for TV blocks versus finding out 2 hours before you launch something on a digital platform, whether it succeeded or failed, what the buzz is, the difference in the frequency of research that you do, and all of that fuels your decisions. So bringing that cycle down for hundreds of employees from months and quarters down to weeks and days was a very, very, very big transformation. And that's one that we undertook very slowly. So we took it upon us to tackle almost one department at a time. So these were the three things that you kind of had to overcome to get to this point. And it took us the better part of 2.5 years. So it wasn't very, very quick.
It is probably impossible to deliver great results without a tool set, a specific tool set to your occupation, to your job. Can you please share with us what are the tools that you are constantly using in your day-to-day job?
As someone who oversees acquisition, retention, and growth teams, our analytics infrastructure is the most important thing for us. That's our lifeblood. So we have, an excellent head of analytics and insights in Seema Mondra at Discovery. She's my peer and leads the analytics team. We have an Adobe Analytics implementation, which we've put quite a lot of love into, and had it evolve over the last 2 years since we've had it. We've had it for longer, but really put a lot of effort into it over the last, I'd say, 2 to 3 years. Another piece that I end up recommending very aggressively to fellow marketing and tech leaders is a CDP. We are an mParticle client, recommend them very strongly. So that kind of forms the backbone of our analytics infrastructure, is what we do with mParticle and Adobe Analytics, in that we then are able to work with, what every marketer wants, and what every kind of marketing tech company advertises is the single record for the single consumer. But the CDP has actually helped us implement that. And that's our source of truth that then plugs in to the rest of our stack. We use Blueshift for our retention activities. So Blueshift and mParticle work very well together. I'm getting into the architecture diagram now, But I think that is a secret sauce, because I've seen the kinds of retention activities and the kind of data infrastructure that fuels marketing operations in some of our peer streaming services. I've seen what our stack used to be before we kind of set this up, and there's a world of difference. I would say we have by far best in class CRM and analytics stacks compared to any of our competitors. I would say the only exceptions potentially would be obviously Netflix with that massive data science operation that I'm hoping we get close to very, very soon.
Well, in larger organizations, the innovation can be quite a challenge. So I'm specifically interested to know in your team, what kind of people you're looking to bring to your team in order to foster that innovation culture. And in more broader scope at your company, right? How do you manage the COVID-19 crisis and teams that are highly distributed all around the globe?
I think to answer the question around number one, how do you maintain a culture of innovation, period? Number two, what kind of people do you look for? And number three, how do you do this during the pandemic? I'll try and answer those in turn. How do we maintain a culture of innovation? Thankfully, has been influenced a lot by the general manager of what used to be Dplay and is now the international arm of Discovery Plus, who's my manager, Winradit Kulasasraseni. He comes from a startup background. He built his own streaming service before working for Discovery. And I do think that that's a very, very kind of top-down action, is the way he organizes his executive team truly does trickle down to the decisions we make on hiring and on what our management styles are. He is a very, very, empowering leader. And I think he realized that, and I've realized in turn, that the answer to such a quick transformation, I know I said 2.5 years, but our KPIs are, 10x growth, more or less in that period. So it has been a very aggressive period. And in that time, you realize that you have to have extremely empowered teams. The innovation cannot be top down, it never is. It has to be, extremely bottom up, in which case you have to cut your teams loose quite a bit. Traditionally, that would have been okay, and I'll get to why that's complicated in a pandemic. And that brings me to my decision, to my answer on how do we recruit people and what do we look for. I do think being individually driven, relishing independence, knowing that you will structure your own work is a big expectation. I think when you're moving at such a speed, I think there's a big expectation that the role of your manager is to give you the space in which you can do your work, is to unlock doors or help you overcome obstacles that are getting in your way, whether it's in terms of clarity or stakeholder management or anything else. But really, the job of the manager is to be more of a generic problem solver for you than the idea that they would traditionally be transmitting a brief. So we have kind of clear strategic direction, but we have extremely independent and empowered team leads. I do think that's what we look for. That's kind of how our team is organized, and I think it's benefited us tremendously. Coming to the last part of the answer, which is how does this change in a pandemic? It changes a lot. Traditionally, you could walk around the office, visit every city that you're working in once a month, more or less, and teams see you and they can always recalibrate what's more important, what's less important. They're not making their own kind of 80-20 decisions in a vacuum. But you end up having a lot of calls and a lot of meetings about kind of the softer stuff. About, it's great that you said this is our strategic direction, but when it comes to trade-offs, we need to align a lot more often. So you end up having a lot more calls, period, directional calls than you would in physical meetings. And even that once a month physical meeting became very, very valuable. We missed that. So initially what happened is we ramped up the amount of FaceTime that we were having so that everyone would feel comfortable. But then we also realized it's actually quite tiring because you're not just doing your job, you are also kind of relying on work calls to be your social time, to be your, I just had a question, can I ping you and ask you time? There are, not our team per se, but broader teams in the company just didn't work on Slack. when the pandemic started. So there's a big question of, spreading that culture out, reducing reliance on emails, increasing reliance on IMs, learning how to respect people's on and off times, and then defining as a conclusion, Slack-free and Zoom-free time zones in everyone's calendar. I think now we're at a fairly stable point where this is a reality that we're comfortable with.
Well, my next question is about the competition. The great tech giants are competing for the market share, and that competition is quite tough, I must say. My question is, what is the specific, what is so special in the Discovery Plus offering, which can help you win the market share?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. That's the reason that I have a job, is because multiple media companies at some point realized that direct-to-consumer is not a bonus, it's hygiene. We have to do it. Otherwise, we just don't know which pieces of our content are performing. We literally, do not have an audience below the age of 35 ever seeing what we make. So for all those fears, rightful fears, and strategic reasons is, why we ended up in the streaming business. I think it's been very interesting. Discovery's got a very interesting portfolio of assets. It has very different hypotheses in different parts of the world. In the US, it's obviously a huge player in the pay TV space. It's probably the dominant player in terms of real life programming in the US. It is the dominant player in terms of real life programming, but also a giant share of people's TV consumption, period. And ever since the Scripps acquisition, that became even more powerful, because now you're talking about the Food Network, HGTV. These are real cornerstones. When you move to international, that's a bit more interesting. In Asia Pacific, Discovery's IP has been, a really trusted, edutainment, informative, kind of, Animal Planet, Discovery Channel, Discovery Science, ID, like these are the cornerstones of Discovery's portfolio. Whereas in Europe, it is very, very interesting. In Italy, it's invested heavily in local content. Scandinavia, it's invested heavily in local content. In the UK, we have such a big and growing local content footprint as well. And I think that's where the answer lies. There was a news article I was reading that about Amazon Prime trying to ramp up advertising, full building, takeovers and billboards in Stockholm Central Square for Amazon Prime, because their growth hasn't actually been commensurate with the kind of growth they've seen in other markets. And I think that was a realization that you really need to invest in local content, local marketing, local flavors. And I think that's where the strength of a company like Discovery lies. It is, on the face of it, a very large US company, but over time, it's built extremely strong offices all across the world that are staffed by local talent, that build local IP. And the powerful thing that, the Discovery CEO, Dave Zasser, likes to say is we own our IP. Mm-hmm. There's a big distinction between having years and years of confidence, not just commissioning shows, but actually building formats. So Discovery's in the business of building formats that are ROI positive. We're very, very financially kind of astute as a company, I'd say. We never overextend ourselves. We look very, very carefully at ROI. And that dictates the spaces we operate in. We were very financially responsible in our Scandinavian growth story. We're very financially responsible in EMEA, but we're also happy to invest. For example, when Discovery Plus launched in India, the approach to that was similar to, a VC-funded startup trying to enter a very large market. So I do think the distinction there is we have a stronger local footprint. We're able to create local IP faster. We're able to make it stickier. And we're also competing in a slightly different space where we have just the hours of content that we can put up. The amount of binge watching that you can do if you're a fan of any of Discovery's IPs is just disproportionate compared to any other service out there. And I think that's a strength that we have to double down.
I would be really interested to know your view on the future trends for video streaming industry. Can you envision any new trends there?
I think that we were talking a lot about data 5 to 10 years ago.
Yeah.
I think now that period is over. It's necessary. You cannot be a CMO unless you are a very, very strong analytics and insights leader as well. And I think the tools that offer you better compatibility with your existing tech stack are the only ones that you can consider as a result. So everyone in their data infrastructure ends up having a cornerstone. For us, that's Adobe Analytics and mParticle. Anything else that we work with, the first question that we'll ask in league with our CTO is going to be, how well does it work with our stack? What we don't want to do is compromise our data pipeline. What we don't want to do is compromise our view of the customer. Every single piece of MarTech is, it just desperately needs to be added to the richness of the view of our customer. And I'll tell you why. We used to talk about understanding everything about our customers in vague ways, but as soon as you run a streaming service and you've run it for more than 6 months, lifetime value becomes your overarching KPI. Everything, every business decision you make is about expanding LTV. Can you increase the tenure? You're fighting for an additional month or an additional 2 months that you can retain this customer. And the stuff that allows you to do that is core MarTech. It's the discoverability of your content. So you're making decisions on, the CMS that you employ on your front end. It's the quality of your prediction algorithms. So that's where, Blue Shift and mParticle come up for us. Is that actually a strong enough recommendation engine for you? Or are you still relying on very, very manual editorial processes? So I think the honesty of lifetime value and tenure as a component of lifetime value means that people have stopped having conversations about this stuff and are now just going for products that can integrate faster, that truly are API-led integrations, not kind of, a team of 12 that's going to work for 6 months to try and get an implementation done. So the speed of true implementation is really important. The ease of implementation is really important. And does it add to your ability to recommend great engagement to the customer, to expand engagement times, is the litmus test. It's just black and white. So it's made a lot of our decisions a lot easier.
Well, 5G is being adopted around the globe. What impact do you think it will have on your industry? Can you see or envision any new use cases that haven't been available before?
Yeah, I think I think it might, I think it's going to shake up some commonly held beliefs. We look at all of our data. We're a sports company, we're an entertainment company, we're a sports plus entertainment service. We'll be, home of the Olympics all across Europe. So we've got this really complex, portfolio. We've got viewers coming to us for all kinds of reasons. But we also have some very strongly held truths. We know that viewers that watch us on the big screen or on connected devices are our most sticky users. They're the ones that have the longest tenures. Obviously, they're quite engaged. They love our content enough that they want to install an app on another device and watch it there. We also always assume that sports view is big screen view. And it has been for a long time. For a long time, sports is the only thing that bucks, the VOD trend, in that it's still at a scheduled time, you still want to watch it live, and you want to have, a stable, as immersive an experience as possible. And I do think 5G is gonna put a bit of a dent in that. We have some very interesting tech providers that have come to us and talked to us about augmented solutions to the sports viewing experience. The idea of being able to chat with your friends while you're watching something, the idea of answering polls, quizzes, being able to potentially down the line place bets. Obviously, that's a touchy subject because there's regulations involved there, and the company as a whole always kind of takes very considered decisions on stuff like betting. But similar to that, there's all of this engagement wrapper around sports that has never really taken off, because at the end of the day, people haven't really wanted to compromise the big screen, clean viewing experience of a live sports feed. As soon as you make that experience mobile, because you can deliver bandwidth, because you can deliver kind of HD viewing while you're on a mobile device, tablet or a laptop remotely, I think that starts to cause some cracks in that experience. So I think immersive experience around live sports viewing is going to be very interesting. And I think obviously the implications for gaming, which is the biggest piece that will be unlocked with 5G connections are going to be massive. I'm very interested to see how we expand the definitions of media beyond just video and into gaming and interactive experiences, because that's I think that's the Shangri-La that media companies are waiting for, is how do we get into that game.
Well, I would be keen to know what kind of advice can you give to a company that wants to succeed in the media industry, in the streaming industry specifically. We all know that industry is full of great giants in technology. So is this even possible to succeed and to become innovative and win the market share within the industry?
Well, I think that's a great question. I think that the traditional VOD/streaming service requires a lot of capital. It requires a lot of capital in terms of, being able to license content or commission content. It requires a lot of capital. I think it requires less and less capital in terms of tech setup, because, as you mentioned, there's just so many cloud offerings out there that makes this very easy. So you almost don't have an in-house product and tech arm for the back end the way that you would normally. So I think that hurdle has been taken away, but I think the content hurdle is still massive. If I can really oversimplify this, any media service is looking to do two things. It's in terms of content. It's looking for the piece of content that will bring you in. It's the reason you come to the service. So in the UK, that would be, Love Island, bringing people to wherever it's streamed. That service, it doesn't matter if it's the ugliest, UX in the world. If I have to watch the Love Island premiere, it's such a great IP that I will find it. I will, download the app or go to the website and I will view it. That's the kind of the acquirer IP. And then the next question, which is the capital intensive question, is the retention IP. Because you cannot possibly, for every single consumer cohort, invest in flagship acquirer IPs again and again and again and again. You can't launch a Love Island every month, but every month your viewer is making a purchase decision. So then you come to the retention game, which is, do you have a library of content? Do you have a backlog? Do you have, are you able to answer that question satisfactorily that a viewer asks themselves every month, which is, should I renew this? Do I need it right now? And they're asking themselves two questions. Do I use it often enough, which is the retention part? And do I believe that the next big thing that I definitely will want to watch is going to be on the service 3 months down the line? If it's longer than 3 months, your consumers will just unsubscribe and resubscribe. And we saw a lot of hop on, hop off behavior in the industry, where people would come in, have a free trial and then bounce, come back for a free trial and then bounce, or subscribe for a month, bounce, come back. And that's very harmful to a streaming service, because you're spending marketing money bringing in these people each time. So the economics of the business, I think, make it really, really difficult for a startup in the traditional just video on demand space. I do think it's a bit more interesting. We have DAZN, not sure if we can still call them a startup. We've got DAZN looking at sports in a very, very interesting way, where they're trying to pick up all of the sports that your flagship media companies may have left under the radar. They've got a monopoly on boxing and fighting. They're trying to pick up more interesting rights. But again, with a similar challenge of how do you build enough volume to retain users? I think the more interesting part is probably in the enabler ecosystem. It's in, we didn't contract, so I can feel very guilt-free about recommending them. We met a company called LiveLike that does very, very innovative stuff around building an engagement wrapper around the video viewing experience. So it's the do part of the view and do, aspiration that most media companies have had. And they're the ones who kind of build the interactive layer around the viewing experience. So can you kind of have a joint viewing session? Can you interact with people while you're watching something jointly? Can you build a social engagement experience around the viewing part? And I think that's where the interesting piece lies. I do still fundamentally believe that media companies are not, even the tech giants, are not really being as innovative when it comes to the viewing experience as they are in many other areas of their tech development. OTT services is still quite vanilla. It's still, here's some recommendations. here's a front page that you can marginally reorient to your tastes. Here are some really standard rails. We're still operating in the Rails universe, which if you were to talk to a UX designer in any other area, whether it's gaming or something else, they'd tell you, oh my God, like every 2 years in my industry shifts this completely. So I do think that the experience side is still open to disruption, but I think that a startup operating in the space would be best placed to be a pure tech player rather than actually digging into the content side, where I think the moat is still too deep for new players to enter.
Sid, thank you so much for your time and for your insights. I believe that listeners will find them invaluable.
Thank you. This has been fun.
Thank you.